I'm Mary Scanlon, married to Tony Scanlon, but my first name, I was Mary Howard, was my father's name, and Uncle Joe, as we call him, J.T. you call him, he was my uncle, and my mother was Tony Byrne, Antonia, and was his sister, and he had 4 sisters and one brother. He was born in Wicklow, and he was born in the Bridge Hotel in Wicklow town, and he was the first of the children of William Martin Byrne and Mary Ellen Byrne. And Mary Ellen Byrne, her father was Thomas Murphy, who leased the hotel at that time from the Halpin family. They were nieces of Robert Halpin. Antonia, my mother, she was my mother. She was born in 1907, and she married Patrick Howard, a young engineer who had come from Cork. And the story that we heard, anyhow, is that he came and he stayed in the Bridge Hotel, and that's where he met my mother. When I was young, in the early years, well, maybe when I was 4 or 5, my family moved to Kerry at that time, so we would not have met Uncle Joe, as we would call him later. Occasionally he would come to visit us in Kerry. He always kept contact with his sisters, one of them, which was my mother, and his other sister Eileen. He always had great contact with members of his own family. He was Uncle Joe to everybody, and visited different family members from time to time over the years. Well, my memory was that he was always taking photographs, and I suppose in the early years I don't know what sort of a camera he had, but in those times the early ones would have been the box camera, probably Kodak, and anytime we met him from then on and from years later, he was always taking photographs. And well, then in 1955 I came to live in Wicklow, and I went to school in Wicklow, and I stayed with Uncle Joe and Aunt Mairead for 5 years when I went to school here in Wicklow. And so I lived with them for that length of time, for 1955 to 1960 when I left school. But during that time, the memory was that Uncle Joe was always taking photographs, and one occasion we were down in near Dromoland Castle, and he said, "I want to get a photograph of the castle," but he said, "Mary, will you kneel down there in the grass so he could get a good view of the castle, not of me." And but anyhow, that was he was always humorous. He was a humorous character, and got great fun out of people and talking with people. Yeah, my mother did tell us that when they were young, she remembers black and tans coming into the hotel, which would have been, I'd say, in 1917 and 1918. My mother was 17, I suppose, at that time, but she remembers they were looking for Uncle Joe. Well, they were looking for Joseph Byrne, as he originally was known. He changed his name to O Byrne later on because he was involved with anything to do with Irish and the Gaelic language and Gaelic League and that sort of thing. His own father was a member of the Gaelic League, the old Gaelic League, even when my grandfather lived in England for some time. So I think he inherited that aspect of Irish and Irishness. Mm-hmm. And I came across, well, that was that time, yeah. And then I wouldn't have known how he came to be imprisoned. I think he was imprisoned on the Murrah, but I'd have to ask some other historians. They might know more about that. Mm-hmm. I think there was a place where they kept these kind of young fellows prisoner. And of course, in those days, again, a lot of this story I heard from my mother. that his mother was praying to every saint in heaven for the release of him from prison. And actually he was released in 1922. And he also, the other aspect of him in O'Glegnaheran, that he was a colleague of Barry. And they were together, yes, when they were separated, when their apartment or flat or digs where they were was raided. And it was described by some friends of Uncle Joe here in Wicklow. He told them about this aspect of Kevin Barry, and Kevin Barry were in this digs, I think, because they were both studying in the university. Well, he was studying in UCD, engineering. And so a lot of the friends that he knew from that time in UCD, among them was Kevin Barry. And they were raided, and the story was that Kevin Barry got separated from the rest of them, and you know the rest of the story about Kevin Barry.
Nazi planes dropped their loads of death over a wide area of Dublin, killing and injuring more than 100 people. This is not the first Nazi air raid on Erin. There were 3 such incidents in January.
Hi, my name's John Goodman from Wicklow Town. I'm a local historian with a keen interest in Irish military history and anything particularly pertaining to Wicklow. So the emergency is what the Second World War was commonly known as in Ireland. The name came about from the acts that were passed prior to the outbreak of the war, when it looked like it was going to happen, the Emergency Powers Act, so it became known as the emergency. So Ireland, as part of these emergency powers, the whole premise was to stay neutral. We weren't going to take sides either way, even though we had to be very careful not to completely alienate England or Britain, who were our biggest trading partner. Before, in the 1930s, the Irish military was basically on its knees. That they were spending, the whole budget was 1.5 million a year, of which a lot, at times 10% of that wasn't even used. We were completely under-equipped. The big fear as well was that the Germans would try and invade here, and as part of their plans for Operation Sea Lion, which was their planned invasion of Britain, they had an Operation Green outlined, where they had some plans to invade Ireland and then to be able to attack England through the back door, so to speak. But it was completely unfeasible, and depending who you talk to, a lot of military historians would agree that it would have been very, very difficult for the Germans to invade the UK just across 20 miles of water, never mind to come all the way across the Channel and up the Irish Sea to invade Ireland. So that was the emergency as such. So we were neutral in name. A good story about there was a dogfight over Wicklow and Wexford in 1940, where a squadron of German planes tried to sneak up the Irish coast to then turn east and hit Liverpool, and they were intercepted by English fighters out of Wales, and the Germans turned over the Irish coast, and it was actually witnessed here in Wicklow and over North Wexford. But one of the English Hurricanes ran out of fuel chasing him. He chased him out over the coast, came back up over Waterford, thought he was in Wales, and crash landed in Wexford. And that plane was subsequently repaired and was used then as the Irish Air Corps. They eventually had 12 English Hurricane fighters, but at that stage of the war they were completely outclassed, like they were obsolete. But that's all we had. And the view was that we had to protect ourselves from invasion. We weren't quite sure who. So once the threat came in the 1940s, that Germany did seem to be a threat, and we were going to have to defend ourselves. And even when the German Reich was at its most powerful after France and Belgium and Holland had fallen. And it looked like Britain might actually go. Then there was a big increase, and by 1942 there was 100,000 men in the reserve, and we had 2 full army divisions. So, you know, we can say, you can kind of look at it both ways. There was good and bad came out of both sides of the De Valera's policy on the emergency to keep us neutral. But, you know, if you could grade it, it's hard to say. There was pluses and minuses, so it's still open to debate as to whether it was the right thing or the wrong thing to do.
The ideal Ireland that we would have, the Ireland that we dreamed of, would be the home of a people who valued material wealth only as a basis for right living, of a people who, satisfied with frugal comfort, devoted their leisure to the things of the spirit, a land whose countryside would be bright with cozy homesteads, whose fields and villages would be joyous with the sounds of industry, with the romping of sturdy children, the contest of athletic youth, and the laughter of happy maidens.
In the 50s, we went into a complete, well, we had stability, but stability is also inertia, it's also stasis. Nothing was happening. Mass emigration across England at that stage was rebuilding, huge industry. So mass emigration from Ireland into England, with the result that we were left. Also as well, the church had an inordinate influence on the government through, it seems, with De Valera, who seemed to be completely, well, he was completely enthralled by them. You know, even things like the founding of RTE, one of the first things was John McQuaid, Archbishop John McQuaid was saying, we need somebody in there in RTE watching what's going on to make sure that the right message is being given. So in the 50s, nothing really happened. We basically just sat and watched the rest of the world develop around us. He had a very clear vision of what he thought Ireland should be, which is probably at odds with, especially from the 1960s onwards, with a lot of what the population would have thought Ireland should be. He's one of those interesting characters. The last man standing after the 1916 Rising due to his American citizenship. He was the only one of the leaders that wasn't executed, so he, by default, became the man in charge. So after eventually leading Fianna Fáil into government, he served a couple of terms as Taoiseach, and he lost in 1948. He was voted out and Costello became Taoiseach. And even during the war, he actually held he called a couple of general elections, which he was advised not to do because they said it was a bad idea to be having elections in the middle of the war. It would completely destabilise the country and what have you. But he went ahead and did that. He managed to form governments in those occasions. But he was very much seen as the symbol of Irish nationalism because of his actions in 1916. And he had this romantic vision of Ireland, the comely maidens dancing at the crossroads, that he's seen a rural Ireland, and a agrarian-based Ireland is the way to go, not a modern industrial country. And some of his policies would have probably, almost directly led into the level of stasis that we had in the 1950s, fallout from his policies. So once he became president, then his sight deteriorated over the years. He was very much the figurehead until his death.
Public Nahéireann, the provisional government of the Irish Republic to the people of Ireland. Irish men and Irish women, in the name of God and of the dead generations from which she received her old traditions of nationhood, Ireland, through us, summons her children to her flag and strikes for her freedom. Having organised and trained her manhood through her secret revolutionary organisation of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and through her open military organisations of the Irish Volunteers and the Irish Citizens' Army, has patiently perfected her discipline. Having resolutely waited for the right moment to reveal herself, she now seizes the moment, and supported by her exiled children in America and by gallant allies in Europe, but relying in the first on her own strength, she strikes in full confidence of victory. We declare the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland, and to the unfettered control of Irish destinies to be sovereign and indivisible. The long usurpation of that right by a foreign people and government has not extinguished the right, nor can it ever be extinguished except by the destruction of the Irish people. In every generation, the Irish people have asserted their right to national freedom and sovereignty. 6 times during the past 300 years, they have asserted it in arms, standing on that fundamental right, and again, assisting in its arms in the face of the world. We hereby proclaim the Irish Republic as a sovereign, independent state, and we pledge our lives and the lives of our comrades in arms to the cause of its freedom, of its welfare, and of its exaltation among the nations. The Irish Republic is entitled to and hereby claims the allegiance of every Irish man and Irish woman. The Republic guarantees religious and civil liberties, equal rights and equal opportunities to all its citizens, and declares its resolve to pursue the happiness and prosperity of the whole nation and of all its parts, cherishing all the children of the nation equally, and oblivious of the differences carefully fostered by an alien government which have divided a minority from the majority in the past. Until our arms have brought the opportune moment for the establishment of a permanent national government, representative of the whole of the people of Ireland, and elected by the suffrage of all men and women, the provisional government, hereby constituted, will administer the civil and military affairs of the Republic in trust for the people. We place the cause of the Irish Republic under the protection of the Most High God, whose blessings we invoke upon our arms, and we pray that no one who serves that cause will dishonour by its cowardness, inhumanity, or rapine. In this supreme hour, the Irish nation must, by its valour and discipline, and by the readiness of its children to sacrifice themselves for the common good, prove itself worthy of the august destiny to which it is called. Signed on behalf of the Provisional Government, Thomas J. Clark, Sean McDermott, Tomás McDonough, P.H. Pearce, Eamon Cant, James Conley, and Joseph Plunkett.
My name is John de Courcy. Before I retired, I was with the Wicklow Town Council for 40 years, and within that time, I spent 27 years on the Wicklow Fire Service. Before that, my father and some of his generation before him were all in similar positions going back to the year 1916. There was actually a housing review taking part in 1908, which was called the Working Man Housing Act, which meant that they were trying to get people out of the slums, basically, of Wicklow Town, which there were many. Old substandardised housing, which the Chief Medical Officer had indeed condemned at that time. So J.T. actually had drawn up a plan which took several years to sort out. And in 1939, he started the 120 housing scheme on Ballinairn. Now this was quite revolutionary compared to what people had prior to that. They had actually running water in houses, they had a bath in the house, they had a toilet in the vicinity of the back door, which was totally alien to what they had prior to that. They continued to build houses in Casa Street, Council House in Casa Street. They continued to build houses up in Collie Row, and then they did some as well over on New Park Road, I think, as well, started some there too. But quite an amazing amount of housing JT was involved in at that stage. But I have to say that JT, in his time as regards housing, he was revolutionary in the town. The amount of housing that he actually built, and the amount of people he employed. Talking on the employment side, he also had a lot to do with the employment of non-employed people at the time. He was kind of, at the time, people were very poor. You can well imagine coming out of the Depression, coming into the Second World War, with very little employment. Most of the people were involved in fishing at that stage, and not a lot of money in that. So coming up to Christmas generally, he would have employment schemes like building concrete roads, putting in new water mains, things like that. He did one from the Grand Hotel to the Wooden Bridge back in the 30s as well, which gave a lot of employment at that stage. You can well imagine mixing concrete by hand, and would give a lot of employment, and take a while to get sorted out. And that was great for the people at the time. They really appreciated that. During the war and the Depression, it was the town clerk had instructed the engineer to make sure that he had enough turf for the seasons. So JT actually took his car and a few of the people from the council, a few of the local councillors, up to the Sally Gap and also to Ballinglen and Ancurra to look at the supplies that were available, because this had to do for the whole year. Now, again, it was a scheme by the government which had to be sorted out. JT would have sourced this stuff. He had to source in around 10,000 tonnes for the whole county at one stage. He was very proactive in that. He was also trying to source out from Athlone as well, would you believe, on some of the old records. So he was a man that got around in looking for stuff, but very efficient at what he did. So there was a kind of a scheme, a free fuel scheme. The British, of course, at that time had either put the price of coal up too high, or they just wouldn't give it to us during that stage. So we had to source our own fuel, and we had to be affordable. So there were two schemes. There was the cheap fuel scheme and also the free fuel scheme. And as you can well imagine, a lot of people availed of the free fuel scheme. This went on for many years through the war as well, and I don't believe this was ceased until about the late 40s actually, or maybe into the early 50s. Quite a good scheme to keep the people going in times of need, and that's how the council and the government were looking after people at that stage. JT would have been looking at doing a lot of roads. He did a road from the Dunbar Glen. It was the old coast road. He had to do a job there, and they were joining up the coast road from Wicklow to Arklow basically at the time. So JT would have been up in some of the quarries sourcing out the amount of stone that he would require to fill these roads at hardcore and whatever. So in some of the footage you can actually see JT up around some of the hills there where the boys were blasting the rock out there. You would have seen some of the army fellas there. Now I know the army would probably have to they would have to accompany the explosives from the main depot down to the quarries and that. So that would probably be one of the reasons you'd see them there in the quarries, that they were proactive in that kind of thing. And JT himself would have been involved in supervising some of this blasting as well. Bridges were a big thing at that time. The motor car, as you know, was starting to come in and all the heavy trucks were starting to use. So they had to upgrade a lot of the bridges at that stage, strengthen them up. Some of the bridges were made of just stone arches, so they had to reinforce them with concrete. Again, probably a lot of the labour there was from probably some of the unemployment schemes as well for those. And I know in particular in the road bridge here in Wicklow, he reinforced that bridge with 6 inches of pre-stressed concrete here, and before he retired on that. Now, JT again would have been probably involved in the latter part when he was county engineer in all the bridges across County Wicklow, making sure they're all pointed up and reinforced and that they weren't undermined by currents as well. This is a big job, and one had to maintain bridges in that condition. JT had great foresight, I believe, that he would want to know what was happening in the world. He would want to keep up to speed with procedures that are happening in other countries. So I'd say he went to see building projects here, there and yonder throughout Europe, just to improve his own mind, just to make sure that he was up to date with everything. He seemed to be a man that just wanted to know everything, basically. A man with great foresight, I'd say.
standing here today in Wicklow Lifeboat Station. This is quite an historic building you're standing in. It's actually the third building that Wicklow RNLI Lifeboat was occupied while in Wicklow. The first building was built in 1857 and it only lasted about 10 years and was actually constructed on the Packet Pier, and due to coastal erosion, almost 10 years later it nearly washed away. So in 1867 a new station was established, and that's on the Murra. And that's now the Cultus Kiltoriarian building that exists on the Murra, and it's still there today, very, very reflective of an RNLI lifeboat station. This station we're standing in now was built in 1887 to house a new slip launch boat, which came in here first at that time. the position of honorary secretary, as it was back then, like most positions in the lifeboat institution, it was established under the premise that the RNLI would provide life-saving equipment to the community, and the community would use that equipment on a voluntary basis to effectively rescue and marine rescue and maritime rescue activities within the community. And it's still that today. The position of honorary secretary was the institution's appointed person locally that would manage that organisation, ensure it worked effectively, ensure there was fundraising done locally to help support the RNLI charity. Generally, the position of honorary secretary would be somebody within the local business community that would have a good knowledge and understanding of how to run the business of a lifeboat from a day-to-day basis. JT would have been one of those people. He would have been identified as a person with the necessary skills to do that, plus an avid history and an avid interest in things nautical sailing within Wicklow Harbour. He was in the position from 1943 indeed to 1970. And during that time would have seen many, many rescues and very significant rescues that here in Wicklow RNLI Lifeboat Station would have been conducted at that time. It was actually JT's predecessor, a Father Doyle, who was the parish priest in Wicklow. He was the honorary secretary of Wicklow Lifeboat Station about 5 years before JT. And he came up with a novel fundraising idea. And what he would do is he would allow members of the public onto the lifeboat and give them a spin up and down the bay. While they weren't charged for the trip on the lifeboat, they were certainly encouraged to make a donation. And most people did. Those trips would have, lots of people in town still remember those trips on the lifeboat. They went up into the 70s indeed, and some into the 80s that we would have still done those sort of trips. They were done out of here in Wicklow Harbour, and also the lifeboat would have made a trip to Greystones Harbour north of Wicklow and do similar types of trips. You can see many photographs of those trips, and thankfully we now have cine footage of that, which is really bringing it to life today. And we can actually recognise some of the old crew members, particularly Ned Kavanagh, who was the coxswain at the time, and Thomas Dittner Byrne, who was the father of the next coxswain, Charlie Byrne, also on that footage. And I'm sure those families will love to see that footage when it comes out. This is a little bit of history that we thought we would never see. It's fabulous to see how the lifeboat service, the harbour, Wicklow in particular, has been captured and immortalised in what JT would have done. Personally, I remember JT as an old man. I spoke to him to give me some of his insights. Unfortunately, at that time, he was quite elderly. But he did give me some insights of that day. And the fact that he captured all this footage, it's a marvellous gift to the community of Wicklow.
Since its inception, the Gaelic Athletic Association has fostered the games of our country amongst our youth. And while the cheering crowds and packed grounds offer scenes of enthusiasm, these are but a culminating point in a long trek from the even more important games in the villages and parishes of the countries and towns. Games that in themselves are fostering the national ideals of the association.
My name is Ivan Sheane. I'm a local motorsport enthusiast, following both 2- and 4-wheel disciplines of the sport. I was particularly interested in the discovery of this film footage of the local Leinster races held on the Wicklow circuit, having been a member or a committee member of the motor club in previous years. Prior to 1950, the races were held in the Tallaght circuit in Dublin, but due to increased building activity and developments in the area, they discovered that they could no longer run the races there. So the club decided they'd have to look for a new location. Searching throughout the country, they came upon several locations, but Wicklow Circuit suited them the best. So they decided from 1950 onwards they would move the international races, both motorcycle and car races, to the Wicklow Circuit. Local people organised these things. It wasn't just the Leinster Motor Club. An awful lot of local enthusiasts helped run these events. And at the time there was great enthusiasm among local people to see these large events taking place. And without local help it could never have happened. One of the biggest contributors at the time was the local county engineer, J.T.O Byrne, who ensured that the road condition was always perfect for the races. The start of the race was in what's known as Blarney, which is now a completely developed area. The race continued in a clockwise direction into Wicklow town, turning right at the Grand Hotel, heading up Marlton, up through Ballynairn, through Woolhams Bridge, where they came to the Beehive. At the Beehive, they turned right and followed the road up towards Ballynabarney, a very wooded area, very interesting spectator area. They continued on along the old road towards the hill going down into Rathnew. Down into Rathnew, underneath the railway bridge, turning right, back through the village, heading on back towards Wicklow, coming through the famous railway bridge and back onto the start and finish at Blarney. Both car and bike races started in 1950. The bike races were always held in May and the car races held in July. And both events attracted a lot of international competition. Factory teams would send their riders and drivers to Wicklow because at the time the Wicklow circuit was very, very popular with the drivers. A lot of people used the Wicklow circuit as a practice run before the TT, which was a Grand Prix at the time. In 2000, local enthusiasts decided that they would commemorate the 50th anniversary of the first race, and they clubbed together and got a monument sculpted and mounted at the entrance to the town, and it's there to this day showing the winners of all the races from 1950 to 1957, and it is also a memorial to those who were killed during the races, 1 car driver and 2 motorcyclists. The motor races and motorcycle races attracted a huge attendance from all over the country because it was the one chance people got to see international competitors. It attracted huge crowds. All the hotels and businesses in the area benefited greatly from this. My first memory of any motorcycle race or any car race was standing on top of the big railway bridge in Rathnew, watching a car coming around the corner and crashing straight into the wall.
Let me introduce myself. I am Theo Phelan, and I'm a planning consultant in Wicklow Town in business since 1974, and originally in Wicklow County Council, where indeed I first encountered J.T.O Byrne, who was an engineer in the council for many, many years. I joined Wicklow Sailing Club in 1977 or thereabouts, and my introduction to the club meant more of an involvement with the people of the town and certainly those involved in the sailing community. And through J.T.O Byrne, I discovered more or less the actual history of the club itself, insofar as that at one particular stage he presented me with a complete set of plans for the club as it had originally been designed and conceived, primarily because of my interest in the planning process. He was a wonderful engineer and had been very much involved in the regeneration of Wicklow, particularly the Castle Street and Hinterland area to the harbour. He seems to have a significant interest in the development of the harbour area itself and all of the activities along the foreshore. In 1951, a group of locals took it upon themselves to try and form a sailing club on the South Quay. They were very fortunate at that time that J.T. was one of the predominantly active members in the development of this committee. His knowledge of planning, his many, many years of consultations and negotiations with the local authority, his understanding of the way harbour boards and everything worked, where it was an ideal accompaniment to the committee in their endeavours to develop a club. He was able to identify the site, and he was part of the group that negotiated for the contract of it. He prepared the plans for the clubhouse construction and administered the contract for its building. We're very fortunate. Initially, the club was very much involved in dinghies, and notwithstanding the fact that there was a significant development on the cruiser side, the dinghies have never been forgotten. They still form a fundamental part of the activities of the club. And indeed, the boat park, which is used for winter storage of cruisers, is used particularly during the summer for the youth development program of the club. This caters for young people from 7 years upwards and trains them in the art and the skills of sailing. It's a wonderful course, very well supported by the town and the community, and indeed has been the lifeblood of the club for many, many years. And we are fortunate that so many of the known international sailors on the racing circuit have come through the dinghy sailing school in Wicklow. The aspirations of the initial founding fathers to have a club which would be vibrant and forward-looking has been maintained year on year by the committees, with the development of many activities, but in particular the Round Ireland Yacht Race, a wonderfully successful yachting event which is now internationally known. and has put Wicklow on the map. There are few sailing areas where you would go to in the world who haven't heard of Wicklow and its association with the yacht race. We were awarded the National Premier Club of the Year. We also had won this in 1979 for our development of junior sailing. And when one considers the number of clubs that there are in Ireland, to be the overall winner as being the best club is some achievement. I would think our founding fathers, and J.T.O Byrne in particular, would be very happy to see the results of their initial labours.